So we've already touched on the tool panel, tool options panel, layer panel, and then you have a brush options panel, which lets you vary the levels of rotation, radius, depth, and so on as you're brushing. You can check or uncheck spacing. If you uncheck it, it's going to use automatic spacing. You can also check to rotate your brush along a stroke. The next thing we want to look at is the different asset panels you have in the interface, such as the Brush Alphas panel. And Brush Alphas are either grayscale or color images that are replicated along your brush stroke. Stencils, on the other hand, is a much larger image that is used as a mask overlay. And it can be projected through the camera in 2D space or using some 3D projection options such as spherical, cubic, and cylindrical. You have a little toggle here in the top right hand corner of each panel where you can adjust the size of your thumbnails. And with all of these asset panels, you can save and access different content folders that are separated by category or project. Strips are nearly identical to Brush Alphas in that they repeat a pattern. However, the default spacing for strips is a little more ideal for certain types of patterns such as stitching, bullets, chains, and the like. What you would want to do is choose a brush alpha that's fairly standard, something like this, instead of a special pattern, and then choose your strip. And as you brush, again, 3D Coat is going to repeat that pattern along your brush stroke. But you want to remember to close it after you're done, because if not, as you start sculpting or brushing and you forget to turn this off, it's going to continue repeating that pattern. Okay. And we already touched on the Smart Materials, which is largely for the paint room. But in the sculpt room, you have a Models palette and you have a Splines palette. Clicking a thumbnail in the Models palette automatically invokes the Import tool, which resides in the Objects section of your tool panel right here, Import. So if you wanted to import a model, you could either do it through the File menu or you could do it right here. And when you click on that in your Tool Options panel, you'll see a range of options available to you. If at any point in time you want to use a mesh that you imported into the Retopo room, you would want to click on the Pick from Retopo button at the very bottom of the Tool Options panel. The Models and Splines palettes are part of 3D Coat's kit bashing tool set. They allow you to drag and drop layers directly into the palette to create a thumbnail and store your individual models. Alternatively, you can take models that you have stored on your hard drive and copy them to the My Documents 3D Coat directory, and then under Vox Stamps, you'll see an Objects or Splines directory. And if you copy your OBJ files there, 3D Coat's going to create individual thumbnails for each of those objects without you having to do anything extra. You can also create subdirectories there in the Windows Explorer, or you can create a new folder here and come to the right hand side of your Voxtria layer panel. After you've created an object, you can just drag and drop it right into the Models palette. You'll then see a decimation dialog pop up that will allow you to adjust the poly count to your desired level. Once that's done, you'll see a thumbnail created for it, as I mentioned previously. The Splines palette works much like the Models palette, except it repeats the model along a given path using the Curves tool. And the last panel we want to look at is the Shaders panel. I should mention that, at least as of this recording, shaders only work on models that you import here in the Sculpt room, and not low polygon meshes that reside in the Paint workspace. So I just want to clarify that. The next thing we want to look at is the E panel. This is where all the magic happens. You have brush modes here, and these are based on how much pressure you apply with your stylus. The absolute brush, though, does not rely on brush pressure. So no matter how hard you press or how light you press, it's going to be constant. It's really good in some cases. For example, if you're trying to smooth by holding the Shift key, the absolute brush seems to perform a bit better than the others because there's no gradient that it has to apply. It's just kind of a no-nonsense draw mode. Then you have Paint by Dabs, as well as some lines here. And then you have the Spline Stroke Draw mode, which applies paint or sculpts along that given path. The Close Spline, however, will fill everything inside the spline. And then you have these standard marquee selections that you normally would see in Photoshop. You also happen to have some Stamp Draw modes as well. You have Depth Limit, For example, if you wanted to indent or cut into an object by a specified margin, you could check depth limit and adjust the value accordingly. Ignore back faces is fairly self-explanatory. You've probably seen this in your own 3D application where you can select all the way through the model or only what the camera can see. You can save a spline that you've created and reload it later. The nice thing about load shape is you can take a vector shape that you have created or that you have in Illustrator. As long as you export or save it out as an EPS file, 3D Coat can read it and it will bring it in. Alternatively, if you use a black and white image, let's say like this one, when you click on Load Shape, then 3D Coat is going to convert it based on grayscale values. That means 3D Coat is going to create closed splines around the white portions of the image. And these apply whether you're painting or sculpting, and even when you're using the retopo tools, sometimes you may want to select with a freeform lasso, other times you may want to select with a brush. Same thing goes for UVs. If you want to select multiple UV islands in just one quick stroke, you might use freeform lasso or any one of these other selection types instead of having to pick one at a time. So you can hit the E key and it will bring it right to your cursor. As soon as you move your cursor outside of that panel, it's going to disappear. So hit the E key again, no matter where your cursor is, it's going to bring it right to you. When you hit the S key for symmetry, it's going to bring it right to your cursor. And at any point in time, you can actually bring the tool panel to you as well by hitting the space bar. It's going to be arrayed just like you have here in a tool panel. The first section is going to be your brushes, whether you're in surface mode or voxel mode. And when you're in surface mode, Live Clay Tools basically is an extension of your brushes. Then you have the adjust section, which, as the name implies, it's going to allow you to create adjustments to an already existing model. Whereas objects is the next section. It's going to help you create new objects in the scene. And then the last section is commands, where you can increase the resolution, where it's going to basically double it. Resample will let you sample down or up in whatever direction you want to go. Clear basically deletes the model from the layer but leaves the layer intact. And then smooth all is a way to do just that. It's going to smooth the entire object or the layer that you have selected. When you're in surface mode, you have some additional options available to you. Then the last thing we want to look at is the navigation bar and your camera options here. So let's look at the camera options first. You have a range of preset navigation options, your standard 3D coats, 3D coat with arrows, first person shooter type of navigation, Maya, Softimage, and ZBrush Light. What else do we have? If customized navigation, you have a large panel here that gives you a pretty exhaustive range of options. If you want to change your background from the standard HDR environment map to a vertical gradient, you can choose that here from the background menu. And also you can change the lighting right here in these first three icons. The first one is ambient lighting. You can increase or decrease the light intensity. The third icon will rotate basically a spotlight. And you can rotate up or down as well as side to side. This fourth option is when you're using your HDR map. So let's first enable that. Let's first check Use Environment Map. And you can see how blurry it is, but this fourth icon allows you to drag to the left and you can reduce the blurriness. Drag it to the right and it will create more and more blurriness. So that's very useful. And the next few icons are for navigating in your scene using these widgets. Pan, zoom, and so on. Field of view. All will simply frame up inside the viewport. Pin typically will remember where you last had your cursor, but it may not always work the way you expect. So what you can do is use the keyboard combination. If you hover over it, you can see at the bottom of the tooltip what the keyboard combination is. So it's Shift Z for the pen, and then Shift A will frame up. And then the next icon will just restore it to the camera default. The next icon after that, this little cube icon, toggles your perspective and orthographic views. So let's go to orthographic view. And let's choose a map here. You can turn your grid on and off here. You can enable your axis handles to show in the viewport. This will toggle full screen. And again, you already saw the HDR panel here. And this is the way that you can load a new HDR map and see a thumbnail. Now the first time you load it, it might take extra seconds, but once it's already loaded in here, 3D Coat stores it in memory so that you can quickly switch between HDR maps on the fly. Okay, so that's going to conclude our general overview of 3D Coat. The goal here was to go over the relationship between the individual workspaces and also to cover some of the most common elements in the UI. In the follow-on videos, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the individual workspaces and cover some of the tools you'll typically want to use. So stay tuned and thank you for watching.